Hey guys, so we're here today to talk about dynamic pricing or right pricing your games. I'm going to introduce Nicholas, and Nicholas will tell a little bit about your company and what you guys do. Then we have a couple questions. If we have time at the end, we'll ask audience questions. We tend to, regarding dynamic pricing, we tend to get some questions on that, so we're going to try and leave at least 5 minutes at the end. Go ahead.
Sounds good. Yeah, so hi guys. I'm Nicholas, founder and CEO of Gondola in New York. We exclusively focus on dynamic pricing for mobile, Facebook and browser games. And when I say dynamic pricing, that means that we provide a service where we take over the pricing of in-app purchases, more specifically the rewards that players get for an in-app purchase, and all the virtual goods in free-to-play games. And yeah, so that would be the intro.
So as far as dynamic pricing goes, there's a couple different ways, and we're gonna talk about both methods of dynamic pricing. There's a few different ways that we're looking at it. There's the school of thought that it's right pricing, where the goal is to get charging the correct amount for each item or transaction to maximize player retention and balance the game. The other method is to provide different players different pricing to engage them, get them back into the game, retain them, or somehow incent them in more detail. So what we're gonna start with right pricing, about how you can use dynamic pricing to right price your items. And Nicholas, can you go through the process of how that would happen?
Yeah, so generally the idea is that game developers, regardless of what platform they are on, regardless of what genre their game is in, do a whole lot to customize the experience for different kinds of players. Segmenting comes to mind. And they also do a whole lot throughout the life cycle of a game in order to improve the game and like constantly iterate based on the data that they are receiving as far as player behavior goes. What we have, however, observed in the past couple of years, and I should mention here that my co-founder and I have an indie game development background ourselves, so we know all of these things firsthand.
He's got the scars on the back if anyone wants to see it.
Yeah, I can show that around a little later.
Sure.
No, but my co-founder and I have very much experienced this ourselves, and the challenge is that pricing for a game, and that certainly includes all the virtual goods that you're offering the game, as well as most of the time the in-app purchases. That's done sometimes in like alpha or something, like a game designer and a producer sit down and essentially populate an Excel sheet, and then that is never being touched again. And so there's two problems with that. First of all, they are not iterating this according to how the player base really behaves and how it also changes over time. And then secondly, the idea of the one price fits all, like all different kinds of players. If you have 1 million MAU, you obviously have a whole bunch of players that are not even going to last 15 seconds in your game. And then you have a couple of players that will play your game for years. And assuming that the pricing that you can provide, or like a one price that suits both of those, is quite obviously not going to work. So
well, I guess we went into the segmented pricing versus the right pricing.
That is true.
So which tends to be a little bit more contentious. And just to be candid, one of the things that we see, one of my concerns is when I hear Nicholas talk about dynamic pricing, how pissed off is my user base really going to get? And that's a big concern, and that every time I look at the dynamic pricing, I have people talk to me about dynamic pricing. I'm always like, how do you keep people from being pissed if this guy's paying a nickel, I just paid $1, and I'm gonna find out. So tell me what the results are when you do. I mean, obviously you've done this multiple times. First of all, how often is that an issue?
Truth be told, never.
Never.
Yes.
It's never been an issue.
It has never been an issue. That I know that sounds hard to believe, but it really has never been an issue. But I will probably let me just address where I think your concerns come from.
Okay.
A lot of developers out there have experimented around with promotions a lot, and they think, hey, we were running this promotion recently, or like we were running an A/B test, and we were trying to find out if for our 5,000 gem package, we can charge $9.99 or $19.99. So we just ran a random A/B test across our entire user base, divided it up, and in order to figure out what was the better price point. And then all of a sudden, they're getting, like a backlash from the user base, and like they get these screenshots on Facebook and say, hey, I'm seeing this price, my friend is seeing this price. This is totally screwed up, so I don't like this anymore. And this is then what oftentimes happens as far as the assumption goes, what we do as far as dynamic pricing goes, and that will also happen. There's two crucial differences in what we do to what I just described. Number one, we don't randomly apply prices. We cluster the user base according to player behavior and group users that are alike together. And the prices are applied to the different user clusters. So what happens is that if you and I play the same game, right, and we are at similar levels of progress and we sit next to each other, the chances that we are going to be in the exact same pricing cluster is probably north of 99%, right? So if we would play, we would never see different prices. That's very different than...
Okay, so one of the methods that people can use is to make sure they're careful with clustering.
Just make sure to group alike players together, That's one thing. Then the other thing is, I just described, the 5,000 gem package, are you going to charge $9.99 or $19.99? That's kind of a double or half pricing approach. Dynamic pricing is nothing that, works with extreme price changes. The 90% of the price changes that we apply are anywhere between plus 5% and minus 10%. A lot of the time we actually drop prices. So it's something that works at scale. With a big user base, multivariate testing, machine learning, all these things come to mind, and then small increments at a larger scale really make a significant difference.
So in this room, who in here is publishing a game or developing a game right now? What's the percentage of people? Have any of you guys tried formalized dynamic pricing? Anyone in here? Oh, in the back. How'd it work out?
It's really hard.
It's really hard?
It's really hard.
What makes it so hard?
We do it cross-platform.
Okay.
Oh, well, yeah.
Between web, PC, and mobile, it's very, very different. It changed a lot. But we're working on tools that will allow us to kind of alter depending on the platform, depending on the region.
Okay.
But it's very tricky, and we realize we leave a lot of money on the table by not using it on our PC.
But just so you know, he doesn't work. You don't work for these guys, do you? No. I think that's one of the biggest things where I'm starting to see these guys get implemented in a couple of other dynamic pricing groups I know, and I've been seeing lists of anywhere from 3% to about 19% at the maximum. What is a list that you guys have seen?
At the top, we've seen north of 30%.
Okay.
That's quite extreme.
I've never seen that.
But we are constantly, in a matter of 3 months, anywhere between, say, 7 and 15. And that's a lift in ARPU, right? And what I also want to just say here, so oftentimes, the question comes up, well, how do you really measure these results, right? If you do a before and after, so just because my game was making $1 million in October, and then you guys came in, and now we're making, $1.1 million in November, how do I know that, that's due to you? That could be due to like 50 other things, and that's absolutely true. So the solution is that we always run our dynamic pricing engine as a big A/B test in the game, so the game developer can always see how the game is, on the same day in the same billing cycle, performing without dynamic pricing, and that's how we, give game developers a lot of confidence, moving forward. And then, they can start with a small subsection of their player base, and as they see it's working, they keep on adding more and more.
How does this work with ad-driven games?
It actually works very well.
Okay.
So one of the things that we have added over the last year, meaning 2016, is rewarded video ads. It's not a new thing anymore, but I think like as of 2014 and later has really revolutionized, ad monetization in games, and this is what everybody's doing right now. But once again, game developers go ahead and provide a rewarded video ad that in order for or in return for watching, you know, a 30-second ad, you get like, you know, 50 gold or something.
Okay.
So what happens is that that's an interesting reward for an early player in the game, you know, where the next weapon upgrade, you know, costs 100 gold or 150, but as you progress through the game, you know, 50 gold is not worth a lot to you anymore, and all of a sudden, you know, you have a highly engaged player that really likes actually engaging with video ads, but it's just not worth it for him anymore because he has to watch like 40 ads in order to get one thing out of it. So what you do is you dynamically price the reward, or actually dynamically change the reward, you know, that the player gets according to the player behavior, and then that works really, really well with ads.
And that'll see the retention go up, which will
Yes.
see everything else go up. Okay, I promised we'd let questions for the last 5 minutes. We're coming on to the last 5 minutes already. Does anybody have questions here? Go ahead.
So when you make these clusters, how do you manage when someone moves from one cluster to the other?
Very good.
Wait a second. Can everyone hear that, or should I repeat the question?
Maybe we'll just repeat the question.
Okay, he wants to know if you put somebody in one cluster, you make a change in one cluster and they're all playing together, what happens if that person moves to another cluster? That's a good question.
Happens all the
What does
time.
happen?
No, it happens all the time, right? And that's also something that, you know, I think differentiates clustering from segmenting. Usually if game developers do segmenting, you know, somebody goes into a segment and they stay in that segment and they have that label from that segment. So the way we do that is that every single player gets a unique gondola ID, so we can track them like with a number, and as they progress through the game, and by the way, you know, as far as metrics go, you know, progress is one of the most important metrics to consider when it comes to pricing. We are following this player and he moves from cluster to cluster, and then, you know, might go into a different pricing group, which obviously happens much more quickly in the beginning of the game. You know, there's already a difference between somebody that played, you know, 1 minute and 10 minutes. But, you know, later on in the game, you know, they change clusters much more slowly. But that's how we manage it. We provide unique user IDs for every player we see.
You've never had any negative feedback if someone gets charged a bigger price?
Nope.
He asked if we ever get if there's ever negative feedback for different pricing.
The concern comes up a lot. I will absolutely admit that, and I also absolutely understand where it is coming from. In the end of the day, you know, there's always a belief that game developers have that, you know, we can show up, you know, with case studies and we can, you know, draw all the analogies from the airline industry, from Amazon, rental cars, hotels, where we all constantly do this and everybody has gotten used to it. But in the end, game developers constantly believe that I've heard this thing so often where they, you know, show up and say, by the way, can I tell you a secret? Like, I'm making 90% of my revenue with 1.5% of my player base, right? Which obviously applies to, you know, pretty much every single free-to-play game out there. But no, we have never had negative feedback. The reason is that the situation, you know, that I described before, that Jeff and I play the same game, right? Very, very similar point in the game, you know, and are competing with one another. And we'll see different prices is just not going to occur. The different situation where Jeff started playing the game today and I've been playing for a year, right? We are not going to compare each other, right? He's still throwing sticks and stones while I have a laser cannon, so I couldn't really care less, you know, if like certain prices for like the early player in the early player arsenal are any different.
I know I have vastly different disposable income in my household between the 11-year-old boy, the 13-year-old boy, the 18-year-old boy, and me. And this has been going on for years because we'll all be sitting there and my youngest son, who has no disposable income, will be like, yeah, Dad, stayed off of Clash of Clans for a week, here's my bonuses. I'm like, oh! And he'll catch up because they have time, I have money. So the only way I can compete with them is I can outspend them and lie. And don't tell them. Don't tell my kids this. But yeah, it's actually been going on for years. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah. So 2 questions. So what's the frequency?
Is there a microphone?
Yes.
Yeah.
How often do you change the prices, and how can you integrate the dynamic pricing to your game in practice?
So the question was, how often do we change the prices and how can you implement it in practice? Question number 1, they are being recalculated on a daily basis. That doesn't mean that they change on a daily basis, right? The pricing engine runs through that cycle every day, but once again, the price changes are, you know, fairly minimal. It's much more about target pricing, and really think about it as a way of customizing the user experience, because that's really what it comes down to, right? As far as the implementation goes, 2 years ago we used to do SDKs. They've gone out of fashion, so it's API. Way it works is all we need from the game developer is essentially a list of everything that you're selling in the game. You know, you can feed that via Excel into our dashboard, all the in-app purchases, and then if you have a regular promotional schedule, you can provide that. Then you get an API, which is obviously very lightweight, can be implemented cross-platform, and it's individualized to your game to the extent that it doesn't have a lot of functions that are irrelevant to the genre that you're in. And then what we do when we get started is we divide the player group into 2 groups, and then we don't manipulate anything in the beginning and just see that they are performing equally as they should, right, at large numbers. And once that has been established, that the ARPU between the 2 groups is the same, then we actually start dynamic pricing, and that's then how it goes.
We got 2 more minutes. Any more questions? Oh, okay.
How do you handle offline experience? All of the games that use your
you
service
repeat
need to
that?
be connected?
Want to repeat it?
Yeah. How do you handle offline experience? Do users need to be connected to the internet for dynamic pricing to work?
Good question. Most games that we work with, are set up in a way that you have to be connected in order to play. That's, however, not a requirement for us. So the pricing, the individual pricing for the player gets stored locally on the device in a JSON file that then gets overwritten every time it gets updated. That process usually happens on the splash screen. So if the game loads, then we just push this over. It takes like a fraction of a second, and that is also the protective layer. Should anything ever happen, God forbid, on our server where all the calculations happen and where all the heavy lifting is done, it would never be a game like where, as far as like prices go, you see all zeros. The fallback is always the most recent pricing file that has been stored on the device.
Any more questions? I have a question.
Go ahead.
I just heard you say they issue a gondola ID. So how do you protect their data? Does someone have to give all the data to you?
No, we are recording specifically the data that
Okay.
is relevant to us. Meaning, the API enables us to, track certain metrics that are relevant in the game. And if anybody doesn't want to be our customer anymore, obviously there are provisions that all that will get erased. But the gondola ID is something that is specific to us and that we obviously give the developer access to, so they can, see everything that we are recording. But the data is protected.
But you're not getting any user data specific.
You mean as far as like gender and religion and all that? No.
Okay.
That would be illegal.
Okay, our time's up. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.